During the New Year's Eve party, Mom asked me, "Why didn't you attend your brother's graduation?" I answered, "I had one too. You were invited." Mom said, "We never received anything." I showed the signed delivery envelopes. Every signature was the same. At the New Year's Eve party, my mom cornered me and asked why I didn't show up to my brother's graduation, and I told her I had my own ceremony that same month and that they'd been invited, but she said they never received anything. So I made a little motion with my fingers like I was sealing an envelope and explained that every signature on the delivery slips matched my brother's handwriting. I'm Tom, 32 years old, the oldest kid in the family, the peacekeeper by default, and a lawyer by trade, the kind of guy who rents a quiet one-bedroom over a bakery, runs 5 miles when his brain won't slow down, and keeps his ties rolled neatly in a drawer like obedient little flags waiting their turn. If there's paperwork, I file it. If there's a deadline, I hit it. And if there's a mess, my family used to shove a broom into my hands without asking. That night was all fairy lights and sweet punch floating in a glass bowl, and the living room smelled like cinnamon mixed with arguments that never really went away, and I only showed up because my mom said it would mean a lot to her, and I heard myself say, "Sure, okay, I'll swing by." I hadn't even made it past the coat rack before she started in. No hello or how are you, just loud enough for everyone to hear, asking why I skipped my brother's graduation. I blinked and asked which one, and she made that look she makes and said my only brother, Tom, Jake, the ceremony, the reception, all of it, and said I just didn't show. I felt the cousins swivel and an aunt with a camera tilt her head like a curious bird, and my chest tightened in that familiar way, and I told her I had my own graduation the same month, law school, and that she'd been invited. She said flat and final that they never got anything, and across the room Jake clinked his beer bottle against a glass and grinned with that permanent summer vacation look in his eyes, the golden kid who always managed to land on his feet. My mom repeated that they never got anything, so I kept my voice steady and asked for a second while I pulled out my phone, scrolled past contracts, coffee receipts, and a photo of the bakery cat sitting on napkins until I found the folder with the certified mail. I held up the screen showing 3 signed delivery slips, one for her, one for my dad, and one for Jake, and she squinted and told me not to be dramatic, so I zoomed in and showed her the signatures, all loopy and confident and exactly the same. For a moment nobody spoke. A bracelet tapped a glass somewhere, and Jake tilted his head and laughed, saying it looked like a prank and that he doesn't sign for other people's mail, even though he always did, always standing by the door with his hand out for whatever came in, small stuff or big stuff. I pointed out the dates, the delivery times, the carrier scans, and explained that he'd signed on behalf of the household 3 separate times, and my mom's smile got too bright as she said this wasn't the time because it was New Year's, while my dad cleared his throat without looking up from the game on his phone and asked me not to make a scene. I stared at the neat casual loop of Jake's name where mine should have been, my collar feeling tight and my jaw locking the way it does in court, and I slid the phone back into my pocket. Jake lifted his bottle again and told me no hard feelings and that we'd toast my thing now, asking what it even was, whether I'd finally gotten a job, and I didn't say anything as the TV started counting down 10, 9, 8, and all I could hear was my mom's voice saying they never got anything and the small sound the truth makes when it finally pulls up a chair. I learned early on that in our house, missing information was its own kind of currency, because if something wasn't said out loud it might as well not exist, and if it was said but you couldn't prove it, you were being too sensitive. I was the organized kid, the serious one who returned permission slips the same day and balanced the checkbook for fun at 16, while Jake was pure charm, loud and easy, with report cards that said joy in class, while mine said works hard. My mom measured things in applause and my dad measured them in convenience, and Jake delivered both without trying. When I got into law school, my acceptance letter lived on the fridge for 2 days before it disappeared under grocery lists and a flyer for Jake's open mic night. So I paid my own deposit, rode the late bus after my old Honda finally died, and worked weekends at a firm that paid me in sandwiches and exposure while I told myself it was temporary and that grinding now meant life would be different later. Jake started calling me counselor with a grin, asking me to look over his lease, list me as an emergency contact, explain money stuff like grace periods, and I did because I'm good at that kind of thing, not because it's magic, but because it's calendars and discipline and spreadsheets that make most people's eyes glaze over. My mom liked to say we were a team, which really meant I quietly covered small emergencies before they blew up, paying late electric bills and dropping confirmation codes in the family chat, telling Jake the difference after his tire blew out. But he almost had it covered stories, and he always almost had it covered. It became a rhythm where he danced, and I smoothed the floor. Law school felt like a tunnel where I lived on microwaved rice at midnight, highlighted until my fingers glowed, and treated finals like a low fever I just had to walk through. Too tired to feel proud and focused only on moving forward. I printed my graduation invitations in the library, slid them into heavy envelopes, wrote the addresses by hand, and paid extra for tracking because anxiety makes you practical. And at the post office, the clerk stamped them with a little ceremony I took as a blessing. The replies never came, and I told myself the mail was slow or everyone was busy. And when I mentioned it to Lena from my study group over coffee, she tapped my wrist with a pen and said maybe I should just call. I did, and hit voicemail, then texted, and the read receipt stayed off like they always do. Graduation day was bright and windy, and I watched families hold flowers and cry and laugh. A dad behind me pointing his phone at his son like he could trap the light forever, while I scanned the crowd until my eyes burned, telling myself I didn't care and then admitting that I did. Afterward, I took one photo by myself against a brick wall, wearing a smile that felt correct and a gown that still felt rented even though I'd paid for it. Then went home and hung my diploma on a tiny nail that leaned to the left, and I didn't bother fixing it. 3 weeks later, my dad called. And said, "Your mom thinks you've been pulling away," and I told him I sent invitations, and he answered that they never received anything, and I swallowed hard and said okay. And then he casually shifted gears and mentioned that my brother's graduation was on Saturday, and it was a big day, and asked if I'd be there. I stared at the crooked nail in my wall and told him I had work, and he sighed and said not to be dramatic and reminded me that Jake has always been there for me. And I wanted to ask, but in my family questions like that always came back around and smacked you, so I kept quiet. I didn't go. I stayed at work, filed motions, ate a sad burrito at my desk, and told myself I was building something solid, something that mattered. Jake posted photos online, cap and gown, arms wrapped around mom and dad, smiling wide, with a caption saying he couldn't have done it without his family. 2 months later came the New Year's Eve party, the punch bowl, the delivery signatures glowing on my phone, and the smooth pivot into "this is not the time." What I didn't say that night was that the mail wasn't the only trick in play, because there were all the shared expenses I'd covered with promises of "we'll square it later," a later that never showed up, and emergency transfers that slowly turned into expectations. "Tom's good with numbers," Mom would say. "Tom can float it." And I did, until floating became the air I lived on. There was a group chat called FAM where I dropped screenshots that said paid, covered, booked, fixed, and people replied with hearts, and Jake sent gifts and called me the best brother ever. And then the next month rent hit weird, and could I spot him until Friday? And Friday passed like it always did. There was the year Mom's blood pressure spiked and Dad called me at 1 in the morning saying we needed to move some things around until insurance sorted itself out. And I moved them and sorted them and spent 9 hours on calls while my own client waited. And when it was over, Mom baked Jake a thank you pie for staying with her at the hospital, while I got a text that said, "You're a lifesaver." Then came the one that really stuck, when Jake used my name to test a credit line just to see what would happen. And what happened was the bank called me to confirm an address change, reading off my parents' house and a signature that looked just like the ones on my envelopes. I drove over, calm on the outside and radioactive inside. And Jake met me on the porch like a kid who'd knocked over a lamp and said it was fine and he'd canceled it, and to chill. I told him not to sign my name, and he grinned and said he didn't sign my name. He just signed. And that was always his trick, to blur lines, to smile, to stand in the spotlight and pretend it was just the weather. It wasn't only about money. It was about gravity, because in our family, everything rolled downhill toward Jake. And if the floor tilted, well, Tom could brace it, right? So when Mom asked why I didn't come to my brother's graduation, what she really meant was why I'd stopped orbiting. And when I said I had my own, what I meant was that I existed too. The signatures proved the truth, but proof never beat comfort in my family, and comfort won every time. I left the party before midnight, stepped onto the sidewalk where fireworks popped low like angry little flowers, fogged the air with my breath, and felt the urge to run like I used to until the thought finally gave up. Behind me, the countdown hit 1 People yelled Happy New Year, someone kissed too loud, and I stood there with my hands in my pockets and made a resolution I didn't say out loud, that I was done being the floor. It didn't break all at once. It unraveled thread by thread until there was nothing left to hold. 3 weeks later, Mom started a new chat called Family Plan and opened with Let's get organized this year, followed by bullet points for birthdays, Dad's dental work, and Jake's exciting startup launch, ending with We all need to support. And then she asked if I could handle the cabin deposits for June and said we'd settle up after tax refunds. I typed no, and the chat went silent until Jake dropped in a laughing emoji and asked what I meant by no, and I deleted and rewrote until I said I wouldn't be fronting group expenses anymore. Mom replied that this wasn't the place for attitude. Dad suggested we discuss calmly. I said I was calm. Jake told me I was being weird and that I loved planning, and I said I didn't love being a wallet. Mom's typing dots blinked on and off like a bad lighthouse before her message landed, saying if I'd come to important family events, I'd understand why things worked this way, and I stared at that sentence until my eyes ached. I uploaded the signed envelopes again, attached the carrier scans, and wrote that they had gotten the invitations, and Jake told me to let it go, and I said I had for years. Mom switched to a voice message, sweet and sharp at the same time, telling me I was tired and not to make everything about money. And I typed back that it was about respect. Jake said respect was showing up and accused me of ghosting for months and then returning with receipts like I was cross-examining them. And I answered that I was a lawyer, and he shot back that he was my brother and I should act like it. Something inside me flipped from maybe to no, and I scrolled and saved and kept scrolling through transfers, payments, the credit line email, and that easy cancel it voice in my head. And then I did the thing I'd avoided because I didn't want to seem dramatic. I made a spreadsheet. I listed 5 years of fronts and floats and just for now spots. Not to send a bill, but to finally see it. And when I totaled it, I leaned back and covered my eyes. I wrote in the chat that I was stepping back, and Mom called immediately, and I let it ring and ring again and picked up the 4th time, putting her on speaker and setting the phone on the counter so I couldn't grip it. She said I was scaring her with this behavior, and I told her it was a boundary, and she scoffed and said I wasn't like this, and that I was generous and family-oriented and not to let my job make me cold. I told her my job taught me the difference between generosity and enabling, and she snapped that I thought I was better than them now, and I said no, I was just done paying for the same lesson. She inhaled sharply and said my brother was launching something big and needed us, and I asked her to define us, and the silence on the line said everything. The blow-up went public the following weekend at my dad's birthday dinner, held at that seafood place by the river with the long table covered in white paper, crayons scattered for the kids, about 15 relatives packed in, and a waiter who had to introduce himself 3 separate times because no one paid attention. Jake showed up late like always, kissed Mom on the head, clapped Dad on the shoulder, and dropped into the chair across from me, calling me counselor like he was throwing down a gauntlet and saying he heard I was on strike. I kept my hands flat on the table and said I wasn't a fund, and he shot back that he never asked me to be, smiling at the cousins and joking that I just loved my Excel life, while Mom chimed in with that sing-song voice asking us not to do this here. I looked straight at Dad and asked if we could talk about the credit line issue, and he frowned and said what credit line, while Jake waved his hand and said it was handled, like brushing off crumbs. I took a breath and said he signed my name, and Jake leaned back, grinning steady, saying he just signed a piece of paper in our house, and that I put my name on everything anyway, so it felt fair, and before I could stop it my lawyer voice slid out saying identity theft isn't fair. Aunt Lena tried to break the tension by saying hi and joking about big words and telling me to eat my bread, and that's when I opened my folder, yes an actual folder, because my family loves to tease me about bringing paperwork to dinner, and this time they were right. I laid out copies of the bank email, the account closure notice, the dates, the invitation delivery confirmations, and a list of the money I'd fronted with the amounts blacked out, because dignity still matters even when you're drawing a line. And Jake's face cracked just a little as he flipped a page and asked if I'd really been keeping tabs like that. I told him I was keeping track of my life. And Mom put her hand on the stack and slid it back toward me, smiling at the table and saying I was just showing off, but I left the papers where they were and said I was done covering anything. No cabin, no deposits, no just till Friday. No put it in your car, I'll Venmo you. No more signing for me. and no more being told I didn't invite them when I did. Jake dropped his voice and said I was making a scene, and I told him it was cheaper than making payments. The reactions lined up like a courtroom diagram. First aggression with Jake accusing me of trying to humiliate him, then manipulation with Mom leaning in and whispering what would happen to them if I stopped, and finally humiliation when Dad asked who I thought I was without this family. I thought about that crooked nail and the photo on the brick wall, the low fireworks over the street, the cold breath that hurt my teeth, and without raising my voice, I said someone with a spine, then slid the folder into my bag and stood just as the waiter arrived with a tray of oysters. The timing almost funny. I said I'd pay my part, and only mine, tapped my card on the portable reader before anyone could frame it as drama, and walked away before the chorus started, stepping outside where the river kept moving like it didn't know any of our names. Boundaries aren't fireworks. They're fences you repaint over and over even when the rain keeps trying to peel them. The first week after that, the family chat went off nonstop, Mom sending long, gentle messages that ended with little hooks about love and worry and family, and then slipping in that Jake's app just needed a small infusion to get through beta, Jake firing off memes of flying wallets and Scrooge jokes, and Dad dropping a short line saying we don't do ultimatums. So I muted the chat without leaving it because muting felt like mercy. Work oddly got lighter once I stopped dragging that rope tied to a ship, my shoulders remembering they belonged to me, and I took on 2 new clients I'd been avoiding, ran earlier, cooked real food instead of protein bars and burnt coffee, and my apartment started smelling like garlic and basil at strange hours because I was experimenting again. The bakery cat figured out I dropped crumbs and began waiting outside my door at 7 in the morning, and not everything was dramatic because habit pushed back, like the moment at the pharmacy when I almost paid for Mom's refill out of reflex, and then stopped and asked for separate transactions, which the cashier accepted like it was normal because it is. Mom tried a door-to-door guilt version by showing up with a container of stew and eyes bright with purpose, saying she didn't want to lose her son, and I told her she wouldn't. She'd just lose access to my credit card, which made her call me cold, and I corrected her and said clear. She scanned my place like evidence, told me I looked thin and tired, and I told her I ran now and actually slept. And when she tried again by saying Jake was in a bind, I told her those weren't mine, that I was family too, and that she should treat me like it. And she left the stew which I ate because it was good. Love can live inside broken systems, and that's why they're hard to leave. Jake went loud, calling without leaving messages and texting nonstop, telling me to answer, calling it a phase, saying I owed him a conversation, inviting me to his launch and telling me to bring my card, and I didn't reply because silence was a tool I'd never used, and it felt like learning to write with my left hand. Awkward but exciting. The extended family picked sides, Aunt Lena texting privately that she was proud of me and asking me not to tell my mother, a cousin sending a long message about loyalty that read like an essay he once got an A on, and Dad sending one blunt line saying your mother is crying, which made my thumbs hover while I typed, and erased until I finally sent that I wasn't responsible for her tears when my boundary was reasonable. At work, I had energy for small kindnesses, mentoring a new paralegal through her first hearing and freezing when she hugged me afterward, joining a Saturday pro bono clinic and watching a woman visibly relax once we untangled her landlord issue. The feeling clean instead of frantic like the old keep everyone standing high rush. 2 months in, the group chat fell silent. And that's when the private messages started, Jake texting late at night that I needed to answer or he was coming over, and I wrote back don't. And he showed up anyway at 10 on a Tuesday with that harmless bounce he uses when he wants you to forget what he's capable of. He showed up in the full startup costume, hoodie zipped just right and sneakers so white they looked unused, and I didn't invite him in, instead stepping into the hallway and pulling the door closed behind me until the deadbolt clicked home. He grinned and said, "Hey man, missed you," and I cut straight to it by asking what he needed, which made him clutch his chest like I'd stabbed him. So I asked again, and this time he dropped the act and said bridge money, eyes lighting up like he was mid-pitch, telling me it was just a tiny bridge, 10 days, term sheets signed, only waiting on a wire because the bank was being old. You know banks, come on. I told him no, and he nodded like I'd agreed, saying right, boundaries, love that journey for you. But this was him, and I told him especially because it was him. He tilted his head and said this was really happening, then suddenly tried nostalgia, saying he'd covered for me when we were kids, reminding me about the time he took AC because I missed a quiz and told Mom I was with him so I wouldn't get yelled at, and I told him he lied because it was fun and stuck around for the applause. His voice hardened and he accused me of thinking I was the hero, and I said no. I just stopped being his ATM, which made him stare at me like I'd spoken a spell he didn't believe in, then laugh too loudly for the hallway, and say I'd cave because I loved them. I told him I did love him and I still wasn't doing this, and he left with that casual little salute he used to give cashiers, while the bakery cat watched him go and flicked his tail like a judgment. His next move was vintage Jake, loud and public, a long rambling Facebook post about family who doesn't show up when it matters, not naming names, but heavy on the hint that some people confuse money with love, and the comments flooded in with sympathy and strangers telling him to cut toxic ties, which I ignored while making pasta with anchovies and lemon, listening to jazz I pretend I don't like, and drafting a will for a client who cried because her nephew deserved better because the world is full of families trying to love each other and missing anyway. Then came the call that felt like the universe testing me by certified mail all over again. Dad saying your mother fell, voice thin and scraped, that they were at urgent care and she was scared, and my body reacted before my brain. Shoes on, keys grabbed, halfway down the stairs before I stopped, and called back to ask if they needed me or my card, and after a beat of static he said they needed me. I went, sat with Mom while a nurse wrapped her wrist, bought a good ice pack and a ridiculous magazine because gentle laughter works like morphine, and drove them home because Dad's shoulders were practically touching his ears, and on the porch Mom squeezed my hand and thanked me without attaching a lesson, and I told her I wasn't a wallet, I was her son, and she nodded, tired in a real way for once, saying okay like she was actually hearing me. After that things shifted a little, Dad calling to ask how to file something online and laughing like he'd learned a magic trick when he got it done. Mom texting pictures of the wrist brace with no requests and adding a small calm pink heart. And Jake staying a storm that refused to check the forecast, sending me a screenshot of his negative bank balance like a skin knee and saying fees hit him and it was insane. Me telling him to talk to the bank. Him firing back to talk to me and be a brother. Me saying I was by telling him the truth. And him replying with a sunburned photo of us at a baseball game from 2 years ago saying that was real, and me agreeing and saying this was too. After which he went silent for a week, and the quiet felt like whether you could feel in your teeth. Late on a Sunday, my doorbell rang, and when I checked the peephole expecting a package, it was Jake. Smaller somehow, hands in pockets, no bounce, no costume, swearing through the door he wasn't there for money. And when I cracked it open, he handed me a stack of crumpled envelopes with sticky notes and coffee rings and said they were bills, the real ones, that he didn't understand half of them, and they yelled at him in paper. So I asked if he wanted help reading them, and after he swallowed and said yeah, I let him in. I made tea because it felt serious and old-fashioned, and we sat at my tiny table like two men learning a new language, me pointing to lines and explaining due dates and late notices and scams while he nodded like I was describing planets. And we didn't fix his life or hug it out or roll credits. I didn't pay anything, and he didn't ask after the first half hour. And at the door he said he was mad at me, and I said I knew. And then he admitted he thought he was mad at himself, and I said I knew. That too. And he left quietly while the bakery cat, terrible with privacy, peeked around my ankle and blinked. I slept hard for the first time in months. No applause for boundaries, just easier breathing. And 6 months out, life looks the same from far away and different up close. With me keeping a ledger for myself now, running, sleeping, calling friends, donating on purpose, paying my share at dinners, and stepping off the conveyor belt of digs. Mom asking about my cases without looping in Jake. Dad skipping the cabin, the sky staying put. And Jake learning slowly, paying on time, texting questions. Like what's APR, while I straighten my diploma for me. On New Year's, he texted a photo of 3 certified envelopes at home, each signed by the right person, saying he thought I'd like to know, and I did. And when he added that he was still mad sometimes, I said me too. And when he said he loved me, I said it back. No more bridges, no more bridges. Because love isn't endless bailouts, it's clarity. And I'm not a wallet, I'm Tom, a brother, a son, a lawyer, signing my own line.